What's going on, guys? It's Jimmy here. Welcome to our daily show where we discuss the fourth stimulus check update, stimulus package update, and everything going on here in our country, in Washington, D.C., and everything you need to know about on a daily basis. Money, investing, the stock market, you name it, we covered here on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, make sure to click the subscribe button right now. It's completely free to do so you don't miss out on new videos that come out here every day at 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll keep you up to date with everything going on here. And thank you so much for hitting the like button for us down below. You guys are absolutely amazing. We got a lot to talk about here, so let's jump right in. Also, in this video, we're going to talk about how stimulus checks and stimulus money can be sent out through presidential executive order and not even add to inflation or the national debt. It's very interesting. You definitely want to go watch all the way to the end in this video. We're going to discuss it and tell you exactly how it can happen. So stay tuned. And Mother Nature is still at it with yet another winter storm still going. Over 250,000 people, homes, and businesses are without power still at this point here in our country. Two people in Texas have passed away and died because of the winter storm in Texas. And yeah, that's just been just brutal. The temperatures and the amount of snow and ice this time around here in our country.
So let's turn now to meteorologist Bill Cairns for the winter storm that is making its way across the country. I just got pictures in from someone I love who's in Vermont, and wow. Oof. I mean, they are under feet of snow.
Yeah, some areas got a lot of snow, others got a lot of ice. I mean, it's just been a mess from Texas all the way through New England. And unfortunately, we did even have a tornado yesterday in Alabama. We had one fatality, 8 injuries. 3 of those people are reported in critical condition. And that tornado occurred just to the north of Demopolis. That's in areas right along the Mississippi-Alabama border. So we don't have any other concerns with tornadoes today. This was really isolated just yesterday, and you could see some of the damage that was done there. So they'll be cleaning up today, and we wish those people well that are still fighting for their lives there in the hospital from that tornado. So let's get into what's left with our winter storm. And we still have winter storm warnings and advisories in Texas, even in Austin and San Antonio. We've heard reports that there have been trucks on a highway that have in traffic for about 12 hours overnight on I-10 near San Antonio. So that'll be a story today, is why those people got stuck on the highway. It's kind of one of those situations like we had in Virginia a couple of weeks ago. So stay tuned for more details on that. As far as the totals, 90 million people still under winter weather advisories or winter storm warnings. The worst of it is now located in northern New England. Significant icing in the Hudson Valley and also heading into Massachusetts. We do expect a lot more in the way of ice from Providence to Boston. I know they've closed the schools in that area. And as far as snow goes, a little more for your friends up in Vermont, but they're just about done with this storm. And Mika, of course, this weekend with the cold in Texas, we'll be waiting to see how the power grid holds up. So far, so good. Right now, 15,000 people in Texas without power.
So yeah, let our family members here, our extended family on YouTube, let us know how bad it was where you were. Were you snowed in? Were you iced in? I know, as if the snow wasn't bad enough, the snow after snow after snow. This storm had ice. Yeah, some people were iced in, or maybe sliding down the road. Not on Santa's sleigh this time, but yeah, it's just unbelievable, right? So it's just one thing after another. 2022. If 2021 wasn't bad enough, now it's 2022. Is 2023 next? Are we? Yeah. And to top that off, we just past $30 trillion in national debt. Here's what the White House had to say about it. Check this out.
Yesterday, the national debt passed $30 trillion for the first time. Does the administration see that as a problem, or do you share the view of some economists that debt doesn't matter?
Well, the president believes we need to have a sustainable and responsible fiscal policy, which is why he put forward ways to pay for his major proposals. He's committed to a sustainable and responsible policy in ensuring that our long-term investments are fully paid for, like Build Back Better. I'd also note that this stands in significant contrast from the previous administration and Republicans in Congress, which passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut for wealthy taxpayers in 2017 and didn't pay for it. As we look to the debt, which obviously the president wants to be lower, it's important to note that more than 95% of the national debt was incurred before he took office. The national debt increased by $7.8 trillion during former President Trump's presidency, which accounts for about 30% of its total. So we are working to be fiscally responsible, and that certainly is a priority to the president.
Sounds like she was prepared for that one. She says that former President Donald Trump added 30% of the entire national debt, $7.8 trillion, to the national debt in just 4 years. $7.8 trillion. Yeah, that is true. They about $8 trillion was added to the national debt in 4 years. But in all fairness, Biden's probably going to do the same thing. It's just kind of the amount of money that it costs to run the country nowadays, especially during the pandemic. And the thing is that remember that the just the money for the defense is about $768 billion per year alone. So when you extrapolate that over 10 years, that's $7.7 trillion alone just for that one thing. Yeah, so it just increasingly costs more and more money to run our country um, as the years go on. So the national debt is just going, as you heard her say there, or as the reporter said there, that some economists think that the national debt doesn't matter. It's just kind of a fictional number in the sky that is just going to continue to grow. If you've been watching my show, you know that back in 1990, the national debt was about 3 or 4 trillion. Now it's 30 trillion. In another 20 or 30 years, it's going to be 50 or 60 trillion. Um, it's going to grow forever. At some point, it'll be 100 trillion if we're still around watching my show. The government has the ability to print their own money, so they're just going to continue to just pay the interest on it. It is what it is. And guess what? We're not the only country that does this. All countries in the world, or most countries in the world, do this. It's just kind of how big economics are run. What can you do? The only thing they can really do is just kind of slow the rate that they spend money on, if that even happens. So, but something kind of different, related yet different, is inflation. Again, related but different. If you kind of understand big economics, it's not necessarily the same because remember, we've been adding to the national debt since for a long, long time now. But inflation kind of comes and goes. It's not always the same. But generally, when you come out of a recession, which is what we're doing or trying to do now, inflation generally comes up because when you're in a recession or a depression, which is what we were during the shutdown back in 2020, and now we're coming out of it or trying to come out of it. Of course, the virus is kind of hampering that. But the same thing happened in the 2008, 2009 recession, and inflation went up back then as well. And if you kind of study economics and you study depressions and recessions, when you come out of them, inflation goes up because when you're at the bottom of a recession, you have deflation sometimes, you have very low inflation. And then when you come out of them, inflation goes up because you're just in simplest form, you're making up for the inflation that you didn't have for that period of time when you were at the low. So when you had zero inflation or sometimes deflation because the economy wasn't booming, think about just a couple years ago, or about a year and a half ago, when the country was shut down. Okay, country was literally shut down. We had deflation. In fact, think about gas went, way down. We had, the country shut down. Prices actually went down on a lot of things. Retailers went out of business. Companies went out of business, right? So we didn't have inflation anymore. We actually had deflation in some senses of the word. So now the economy is catching back up to that. So you have inflation. So it's actually kind of bad right now, really bad right now in some cases. In fact, check this out. This is going to be the next inflation report coming out. Yeah, you can see here fresh inflation data could further fuel market volatility in the week ahead. So, when we're expected to get the newest inflation data coming out here this Thursday, it's expected to be at 7.2%. That will be the highest yet and the hottest since 1982. Yeah, so this would further yet increase slightly inflation, and if anything, it just keeps the last one was at 7%. Now we're at 7.2%, and if anything, it's inflation is just kind of stringing along up just a little bit more, and still just kind of running at this red hot, white hot pace. So, and this just kind of further replicates the kind of call that low income seniors, people on Social Security, people on disability, people on low income need support. And this is why we have so many people calling for another stimulus check. And remember that they have $800 billion in already approved stimulus money that they could use, that's already been approved by Congress, that's already sitting there, that they could use. They could take half of that money, $400 billion, and send out a $1,400 to $2,000 for a stimulus check, and it would not affect inflation. It would not add to inflation. It would not add to the debt because it's already been accounted for. It's already been passed. It's already been approved. It's from the first, second, and third stimulus checks, some underneath former President Trump and some underneath Biden, collectively $800 billion. So it wouldn't add to inflation and it wouldn't add to the debt if you even care about the debt, but it wouldn't add to inflation either because it's already been accounted for. It's already added to both those things, okay? It would add no new money to either, okay? So they could take half of that money and still have $400 billion still sitting there, okay? And send out $400 billion to the people most in need because they have $800 billion in stimulus money that has already been approved. And they could do this right now. They could do this probably through an executive order, because if we think about the presidential executive order that former President Donald Trump did, he did something exactly like this. He took money that was already approved by Congress through the Disaster Relief Fund, and he sent them out through executive order. He reappropriated those that money, that those funds that were sitting there by funds by Congress that were already approved, and basically took the executive order and reappropriated them and basically said, okay, this money that's here in the disaster relief fund, I'm going to take that and I'm going to reappropriate them and send them out to Americans in the form of stimulus checks or unemployment checks or bonus checks for millions of Americans with unemployment bonus checks. In that particular case, there were targeted checks to unemployed Americans. There were 6 checks for $300 each. And then states could have kicked in an extra $100. Some states did, some states didn't. So they were a total of $1,800, if I'm recalling correctly. I got to go all the way back to 2020, if I recall correctly. And some states kicked in an extra $100. So it was $1,800, and then some states kicked in the $100 for $2,400, if I recall correctly. But former President Donald Trump did this with an executive order. And he did this because the money was available, was sitting there in a fund, in a bank account basically, called the Disaster Relief Fund, okay? Which is basically the same type of thing that is happening now, okay? Right now, they're sitting in some bank account somewhere, the Treasury Fund or whatever, bank account the US government has, okay? And there's $800 billion probably sitting in a couple different bank accounts in the US, Treasury or whatever account they have, right? Okay, there's $800 billion. Now, the government could do it either through executive order, or they could reappropriate it through a stimulus package, or they could pass it through Congress, whatever they decided, whichever method they wanted to do. But they could probably do it through executive order because, again, the precedence is kind of set. If former President Donald Trump could do it through executive order, because this, you got to kind of think through here. Whenever I talk about this, I always get a few people that say, "Oh no, he can't do that." You have to kind of listen to what I'm saying here, okay? This is money that's already approved by Congress. There's $800 billion sitting there. It's already been approved by Congress, okay? It's stimulus money already approved by Congress. All the executive order would do is just reappropriate the approved money, that's stimulus money, and just reappropriate it from stimulus money to stimulus money for a stimulus check for people. And that's exactly what former President Donald Trump did. Is he took money that was already approved by Congress and reappropriated it to mini stimulus checks or unemployment bonus checks, whatever you want to call them, and sent them out to millions of people. And again, you could challenge that in a court of law and say, "Oh, he can't do this," which again would have been the Democrats doing that. But I remember reporting this to you at the time, and I'm thinking, the Democrats would be crazy to do that. Why would they do that, especially before the election? Because this was way back before the election of Biden versus Trump, the 2020 election. And I'm thinking, the Democrats can't do that. They'd be crazy to do that. If they do that, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot. They're going to try to take checks out of millions of people's pockets by challenging that in an election. I go, and I remember saying this to you, I go, I really don't think they're going to try to do that. I go, they'd be crazy to do that. And of course, I'm not saying of course I was right, but I was right. They didn't challenge it, and Trump's executive order stood, and those checks to millions of people went out. So, do I think that he could do an executive order for stimulus checks? In this particular case, yes, because there's $800 billion of stimulus money already approved. And the cool thing about this is that it's already there, and they only need to use half of it. So they would still have $400 billion of this money still sitting there. So they literally only need to use half of it. So the other $400 billion they could still use for something else. They could use all of it and send out 2 stimulus checks for $800 billion and really help out the people, right? For $1,400 to $2,000, depending on how they want to allocate it. If they don't, remember that they sent out they sent out 1 stimulus check for $1,400, then went all the way up to $75,000 to $80,000 in income, and that cost about $1,400, and that went out to everybody, including adults, children, and adult dependents and college students, and that cost about $400 billion. Okay. And then went out to people making $75,000 to $80,000. The $80,000 was the final cutoff. Between $75,000 and $80,000 is when they got reduced checks. Okay. So if they decided to this time around that those people don't really need a stimulus check this time around, they could reduce that. And I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I don't get to make those decisions. So if you're one of those people that makes 70,000 and you live in New York City, that might be nothing. You know what I'm saying? Or you live in a high cost of living area, LA or something like that. That might not be a lot. Or if you're joint filers, that might, joint filers, that would be, you'd get double that. But you know what I'm saying here. So I can't put myself in everybody's shoes, because in some places that's not a lot, because if you live in New York City, that's not even enough to afford a studio apartment, right? But if they decide they want to be a little bit more targeted, they might target it down to 50,000 or less. You know what I'm saying? So they could actually send out higher stimulus checks, like $2,000, for the same amount of money, and lower the income threshold, um, but up the amount of checks with the same amount of money. Yeah, so that's what they could do here, and send out $2,000 stimulus check for the same amount of money, and they could do that. Um, so that's the thing, is that they have all this money sitting there that they could send stimulus checks out. And remember that we have dozens and dozens of senators and representatives from the House of Representatives that have been in support of a fourth stimulus check. So, as you can see here, this is just a previous headline. This is something that they could do to send out this money, gain a lot of support, in an election year, and also not add to inflation and not add to the national debt, because this is money that's already been approved by Congress, because they're using the $800 billion of stimulus money that's just sitting there. It's just sitting there. And we know that there's already a lot of support for a fourth stimulus check, um, but everybody's concerned about inflation right now. So this is a way that they could send out money to people who need it, gain a lot of support. And again, I'm not from either side here, but I'm just saying that we don't have any support from Republican members for a fourth stimulus check. Okay, so if a fourth stimulus check is going to come, it's going to come from Democratic members of Congress. Okay, there's no Republican members that support a fourth stimulus check. So I'm not picking sides. I'm just telling you guys the reality of things. There's no Republicans that are going to pass a fourth stimulus check. The stimulus check is going to have to come from the Democrats. That's just kind of the reality of things. So this is a way that stimulus checks could come from the Democrats, because there's $800 billion already sitting there, And they could do this through an executive order. They could do it through the reconciliation process, however they want to do it. But they could do this literally without adding to inflation at all. They could just use the money that's already been approved. Or they could do it through a new stimulus package as well. But this is just definitely an option here. So let me know your thoughts on this. And again, email, call, and tweet your representatives. This is something they could do. They could just executive order this, send it out, and use half the money. And there's still $400 billion there that they could use for something else to support small businesses, schools, or whatever else they decide. It's not like they're draining everything dry and then there's not a drop of money left. But let me know your thoughts here down below in the comments. Email, call, tweet your representatives. Let them know this, and let them know that there's still millions of people in need here during this pandemic. And this is a way they can send money out as soon as possible and help people that are struggling right now. So make sure to click the subscribe button right now. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, it's completely free to do so. And this way you won't miss out on new videos. I will keep you up to date here in the loop here. And next up, you can click this video here to watch my newest video next. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.